My name is Álvaro Santana-Acuña. I'm from Spain and I'm a professor of sociology at Whitman College. In 2017, I received a fellowship from the Ransom Center through the Mellon Foundation to actually be one of the first people to use the archives of Garcia Márquez. And I use the archive primarily to write my book, Ascent to Glory, which is a study of how 100 Years of Solitude was written and became a global classic. Garcia Márquez was a writer born in a small village in Colombia. The name of the village is Aracataca. And then he became a writer in his 20s, and then he wrote several major works of fiction. And then in the 1980s, he won the Nobel Prize in Literature, becoming one of the most famous writers, by the end of his life, one of the most famous writers of the 20th century. There are three main things that I learned while I was writing my book. First of all is that we have traditionally this idea of the genius, but I was able to see all the hard work that he put in writing this novel for months. Also how difficult it is to write powerful prose, and also the amount of feedback that he got from people in over 6 countries as he was actually writing the work. So even though this is a novel about solitude, he was actually in very good company and the company of many, many friends in several countries as he was writing this novel. So the exhibition has over 250 items or objects, and among many, many of these objects, of course, visitors will come across objects that have never seen before. And I want to highlight especially that we have selected the manuscripts of all his major works, from 100 Years of Solitude to his last novel, Memories of the Melancholy Horse, as well as the letters that give us a behind-the-scenes understanding of how he also wrote his novels, and also correspondence that he had with very famous people, from the president of the French Republic to, say, Shakira, the pop singer. And certainly even we can also have a better understanding of his actual writing with the typewriters, for instance, that he used, how he transitioned from the typewriter to the computer. Garcia Márquez, also known as Gabo, became an iconic figure, among other things, because he wrote in 1967 100 Years of Solitude, which became one of the most famous works of literature of the last 50 years. And also he wrote other major works of fiction such as Love in the Time of Cholera, Chronicle of a Death Foretold, and No One Writes to the Colonel. All of them have become outstanding pieces of fiction in the past 50 years. I became interested in the work of Garcia Márquez when I was doing my PhD at Harvard University. And at that time I was really trying to answer the question of how is it that things become classics. So books like, say, War and Peace or The Beatles, so I was really trying to offer kind of a sociological understanding of how things become classics, and I thought about doing research on what it is to this day one of the most influential works of Latin American literature, as well as one of the most famous books of the 20th century. And I really wanted to understand how I arrived to that position. One of the things that I tried to explain in my research and also my book and with this exhibition is that classics are classics because, among other things, are not only loved by people, but they're also criticized by people. So they are passed on from one generation to another. I'm not only thinking about 100 Years of Solitude, I'm also thinking about other books, and they continue to enter our life in meaningful ways, right? So we use classics to make sense of things that happen to us on an everyday basis, or measure historical events, or even to name planets. So last year, in December 2019, the International Astronomy Association actually decided to name one star, which is 91 light years away from Earth, after Macondo, which is the village at the center of 100 Years of Solitude, right? So this is what classics do, right? So they have the capacity to enter our lives in formats that they were not at first originally intended by their authors. When we think about Latin American literature, we need to think about the fact that until the early 1960s, writers from the region didn't know each other well. And then in the 1960s, due to a series of causes that converged together, and especially the Cuban Revolution and then the modernization of the publishing industry in the region, then 3 generations of writers came together and they realized that we're really interested in writing novels. Novels that then became extremely appealing to audiences, not only in Latin America, but beyond. And it's precisely this surge, this rise of Latin American literature, what was actually at the time called the Latin American boom, because it was really an explosion, an avalanche of novels in a short period of 5 to 6 years. And 100 Years of Solitude was actually one of the novels that became part of this movement, and that really helped also to make the boom even more international. Garcia Marquez, as a writer, had multiple influences, from local writers in the Caribbean region to Colombian writers to Latin American writers, and especially also international writers. So one of the advantages of organizing this exhibition at the Ransom Center is that the center has an impressive amount of manuscripts from writers that actually influenced Garcia Marquez, from Borges, Jorge Luis Borges, William Faulkner, Ernest Hemingway, Virginia Woolf, James Joyce, and also the Julio Cortázar papers from the Benson Library, which is also here in Austin. And what we do in the exhibition is precisely we show several of the manuscripts of these writers, and we show how they influence, their literary techniques influence the work of Garcia Marquez. Gabo understood that writing was primarily a craft, and in that sense he liked to compare writing to carpentry. And there is a quote that we show in the exhibition in which he basically says that writing is a hypnotic act, in which you use nails and screws and other things to really make sure that you attract the reader's attention, so that the reader is only paying attention to what the story that you want to tell him. In 1982, Garcia Marquez won the Nobel Prize in Literature, and the day after, he received over 600 telegrams from all over the planet. This exhibition is very important, mainly because it's the first major exhibition ever of Garcia Marquez, his life and works, using the archives of Garcia Marquez himself. And there has been an opportunity to basically show to visitors and even Garcia Marquez scholars the documents I have never seen before, documents related to his life and works.